Have you ever wondered what the world was really like before the fall of Sodom and Gomorrah? These ancient cities, often remembered only for their fiery end, were once bustling hubs of trade, culture, and power. But what led to their ultimate destruction? Was it merely a matter of moral decay, or is there more to the story? In this video, we're going to uncover the vibrant world that existed before the divine judgment fell upon these cities. You'll discover how their location made them economic giants, why neighboring civilizations like the Canaanites and Amorites fought for control, and how their religious practices took a dark turn. What can modern archaeological findings tell us about their sudden demise? And more importantly, what lessons can we learn from their story today? If you enjoy diving deep into the fascinating details of ancient biblical history and uncovering truths that challenge conventional narratives, then this video is for you. If you like this type of video, leave a like so it can reach more people, and in doing so, you'll be helping the channel. God bless you. Let's explore the untold story of Sodom and Gomorrah before their names became synonymous with destruction. Picture Sodom and Gomorrah, not as ruins, but as vibrant cities teeming with life and opportunities. Located in the fertile Jordan Valley, these cities sat at a crossroads of ancient trade routes, making them prime destinations for merchants, artisans, and travelers from far and wide. The constant flow of goods, like rare spices from the East and luxury textiles from Egypt, turned them into bustling economic hubs. People from Canaanite culture, Amorite civilization, and beyond mingled here, exchanging not just commodities, but also ideas and beliefs. This thriving marketplace created a sense of prosperity, but beneath the surface, subtle cracks in the moral foundation began to appear. The influence of these ancient cities wasn't limited to trade alone. As merchants and travelers from different parts of the ancient Middle East poured in, Sodom and Gomorrah became melting pots of cultural and religious practices. Imagine priests from various lands sharing stories of their gods, performing elaborate rituals, and debating philosophies. It was this blend of diverse influences that shaped the unique character of these cities. However, as time went on, the integration of these varied customs began to clash with the core values that once held the communities together. This cultural richness was both a blessing and a curse, as it sowed seeds of discord that would grow into something much darker. Despite the hustle and bustle, life in Sodom and Gomorrah was far from ideal. Prosperity brought with it an appetite for indulgence and excess. The city's leaders, driven by greed, imposed taxes and regulations that favored the rich and burdened the poor. This inequality created a social divide that festered beneath the surface. The wealth pouring in from trade made people complacent, turning a blind eye to the growing moral decay around them. They clung to the comfort of their riches, ignoring how it was slowly eroding their society. How did it all go so wrong? The very things that made these cities great were now fueling their downfall. As their fame spread, more people flocked to Sodom and Gomorrah, seeking their piece of the economic pie. But with this influx came a mix of people with differing values, and not everyone shared the same moral compass. Some visitors introduced religious practices considered radical by the local populace. While certain rituals were embraced, others clashed violently with the moral code of the patriarchs, like Abraham, who looked on with concern. This religious tension sparked conflicts that threatened to tear the cities apart from the inside. It was no longer just about wealth and power. It became a battleground of ideologies. The decline of Sodom and Gomorrah wasn't instantaneous. It was a slow unraveling. The cities that were once symbols of prosperity were now grappling with internal strife. As social norms shifted and boundaries were pushed, these changes set the stage for what was to come. The deeper they sank into moral decay, the closer they drifted toward a breaking point. The conflicts and contradictions within the cities were steadily eroding their foundations. And yet, in the midst of this turmoil, there were still voices calling for change. But by then, it seemed too late. What was once a beacon of wealth and culture was now on the brink of destruction. The Jordan Valley wasn't just a scenic landscape, it was a lifeline. Sodom and Gomorrah were nestled in this valley, which stretched along the Dead Sea. The fertile lands were ideal for agriculture, enabling these cities to grow crops year-round. With an abundance of water from the Jordan River, the region became a magnet for civilizations seeking prosperity. The rich soil produced bountiful harvests, making the area one of the most coveted in the ancient Middle East. This agricultural wealth attracted settlers and created opportunities for commerce, setting the stage for the economic power of Sodom and Gomorrah. But what truly elevated Sodom and Gomorrah's status was their proximity to major trade routes. These cities were positioned at a strategic crossroad where merchants traveling between Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Arabian Peninsula converged. As caravans moved through the region, laden with precious goods like incense, golds, and textiles, Sodom and Gomorrah became essential stops. They didn't just benefit from local agriculture, they were trading hubs where exotic products and ideas from far-flung lands were exchanged. This constant traffic brought incredible wealth, but it also introduced foreign influences that slowly reshaped the city's cultural and moral landscape. The Jordan Valley's economic potential didn't stop at agriculture and trade. Its natural resources were another key asset. For instance, the nearby Dead Sea was rich in minerals like bitumen, which was used in construction and medicinal practices. This unique resource was highly sought after, further enhancing the city's economic influence. The combination of fertile land, strategic location, and valuable resources made Sodom and Gomorrah powerful players in the region. Yet, this prosperity also bred competition. Neighboring cities and tribes eyed the region's wealth, leading to frequent conflicts and political maneuvering. Given their strategic importance, Sodom and Gomorrah often found themselves at the center of territorial disputes. Civilizations like the Amorites and the Canaanites, who had their own flourishing cultures, frequently clashed over control of the valley. Each group sought dominance, not just for the fertile land, but also to control the lucrative trade routes passing through the area. This constant struggle created a tense atmosphere where alliances shifted as quickly as the sands of the desert. The city's leaders were forced to balance political power with economic interests, a tightrope act that sometimes led to disastrous decisions. Despite the allure of wealth and power, the same features that made the Jordan Valley a paradise also made it a target. Its strategic value meant that Sodom and Gomorrah were perpetually vulnerable. The more prosperous they became, the more they attracted the attention of rivals. This vulnerability, coupled with internal moral decay, made the cities fragile. The valley, once seen as a symbol of opportunity, became a battleground. The struggle for dominance, combined with the erosion of ethical values, laid the groundwork for the downfall of Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah were not isolated cities. They were deeply intertwined with surrounding civilizations like the Canaanites, Amorites, and Jebusites. But who were these people? The Canaanites were a group of ancient peoples who lived in the region known as Canaan, which included parts of modern-day Israel, Lebanon, and Syria. They were primarily agricultural, mastering the cultivation of grains, olives, and grapes. Known for their advanced irrigation techniques and fortified cities, the Canaanites created a network of small city-states ruled by local kings. Their religion was polytheistic, worshipping deities like Baal and Asherah. These gods were believed to control fertility, weather, and harvests, which were crucial for the Canaanite lifestyle. Their influence spread through trade, making them key players in shaping the culture of Sodom and Gomorrah. On the other hand, the Amorites were originally nomadic herders from the desert regions of Mesopotamia. Gradually, they moved westward and established themselves as a dominant force in the area. Known for their strong warrior culture, the Amorites were often associated with conquest and expansion. Unlike the Canaanites, who preferred trade and agriculture, the Amorites sought to expand their territories through military prowess. They introduced new techniques of warfare, such as chariot combat, which transformed the region's power dynamics. The Amorite presence in Sodom and Gomorrah brought a more aggressive approach to politics and leadership, often valuing strength and dominance over diplomacy. This influence added a layer of tension to the cities as local leaders struggled to balance Canaanite trade ethics with Amorite militaristic ambitions. The Jebusites, on the other hand, were primarily based in the city of Jebus, which later became Jerusalem. They were a small but significant Canaanite tribe, known for their complex religious rituals and temple practices. The Jebusites believed in a pantheon of gods and were known for their devotion to deities associated with the underworld and the afterlife. Their ceremonies were often conducted at night, shrouded in mystery, and sometimes involved human sacrifice as a means of communicating with their deities. These acts were seen as necessary to ensure protection or to gain insight into the will of the gods. While these practices were considered extreme, they were tolerated or even embraced by parts of the population in Sodom and Gomorrah, reflecting how far these cities had drifted from conventional moral codes. The interactions between these groups weren't just about exchanging goods or ideas. They shaped the entire social and moral landscape of Sodom and Gomorrah. The Canaanites' focus on prosperity and trade, the Amorites' emphasis on power and warfare, and the Jebusites' spiritual influence combined to create a society with conflicting values. This complex web of interactions influenced everything from the laws of the land to the rituals performed in public squares. While this diversity made the cities rich in culture, it also sowed the seeds of discord. The people of Sodom and Gomorrah found themselves living in a society that was constantly pulling in different directions. This internal tug-of-war for cultural dominance left the cities vulnerable. With no clear moral or religious compass, leaders allowed practices that would have been unthinkable in earlier times. As different groups vied for influence, traditional values eroded. The Canaanite focus on wealth led to corruption. The Amorite influence on warfare created a culture of aggression, and the Jebusite rituals blurred the boundaries of acceptable religious practices. What began as a thriving convergence of civilizations was now unraveling under the weight of its own contradictions. Religion in Sodom and Gomorrah was far from straightforward. The cities, being at the crossroads of various civilizations, absorbed many different religious beliefs and practices. Influences from the Canaanites, Amorites, and Jebusites created a unique, yet chaotic, religious landscape. The Canaanites, for instance, worshipped a pantheon of gods, with Baal at the center. He was considered the god of fertility and rain, essential for their agricultural society. They believed that to ensure a good harvest, it was necessary to please Baal through offerings and sacrifices. This could range from simple food offerings to more extreme forms like animal sacrifices, which they performed in elaborate rituals meant to secure divine favor. As Amorite influence spread through the region, their warrior-like nature introduced different religious elements. Unlike the Canaanites, the Amorites emphasized rituals of power and strength. They saw their gods as beings who bestowed victory in battle. To appease these deities, they would conduct rituals that symbolized dominance and control. Some of these practices involved blood sacrifices and elaborate ceremonies that sought to demonstrate the strength and power of their people. These rituals were designed to prepare for war, but they also spilled over into the everyday lives of the people, blending with local customs and creating a culture that valued physical might and aggressive behavior. Meanwhile, the Jebusites added yet another dimension to this already complex spiritual environment. Known for their darker rituals, The Jebusites practiced a form of worship that included the veneration of gods associated with death and the afterlife. Their ceremonies were often conducted at night, shrouded in mystery, and sometimes involved human sacrifice as a means of communicating with their deities. These acts were seen as necessary to ensure protection or to gain insight into the will of the gods. While these practices were considered extreme, they were tolerated or even embraced by parts of the population in Sodom and Gomorrah, reflecting how far these cities had drifted from conventional moral codes. This convergence of religious practices created a society that was constantly in flux, where no single belief system dominated for long. Temples dedicated to different gods sprouted throughout the cities, each catering to a different aspect of life, be it fertility, war, or death. This environment led to confusion and conflict as people struggled to determine which deities to follow and what rituals to observe. Leaders found it increasingly difficult to maintain a cohesive society when every faction worshipped a different god, each with its own set of expectations and demands. The lack of a unified spiritual direction began to tear at the very fabric of Sodom and Gomorrah. The mix of rituals and religious beliefs wasn't just a cultural curiosity, it had real consequences. As the cities drifted further from a singular moral code, practices that were once considered abhorrent became commonplace. Rituals involving debauchery and excess started taking place openly, all under the guise of religious observance. The people believed that by indulging in such acts, they were honoring their gods. But in reality, these practices only deepened the moral decay, paving the way for the eventual judgment that would fall upon these cities. The moral and spiritual erosion of Sodom and Gomorrah was setting the stage for their inevitable downfall. The decline of Sodom and Gomorrah wasn't just a result of external influences. It stemmed from within. At their peak, these cities were symbols of wealth and prosperity in the Jordan Valley. But as their economic power grew, so did their greed and moral corruption. The rich got richer, using their wealth to indulge in lavish lifestyles, while the poor were marginalized and left to fend for themselves. This inequality created a society driven by selfish desires rather than communal values. The gap between the wealthy elite and the struggling commoners widened, leading to resentment and a loss of social cohesion. What made matters worse was that the people of Sodom and Gomorrah started to lose touch with the moral principles that once held their communities together. The Canaanite influence emphasized trade and agriculture, but as Amorite and Jebusite practices infiltrated their society, new values took root. The once honored practices of hospitality and kindness were replaced by a pursuit of power and satisfaction of base desires. This shift manifested in the way strangers and travelers were treated. Instead of welcoming them as tradition dictated, the inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah turned to exploitation and cruelty, seeing outsiders as opportunities for profit or amusement. Religious practices that had once been considered sacred began to lose their significance. Temples were no longer just places of worship. They became venues for indulgence. It said that the people engaged in rituals that involved not just sacrifice, but also acts of debauchery, believing that these displays pleased their gods. With each passing year, boundaries were pushed further. Practices that once took place in secret were now performed openly. The city's moral decline wasn't a sudden drop, but a gradual erosion, with each new act of defiance against traditional values marking another step toward their eventual ruin. Even their leaders, who should have been the moral compass of society, became complicit in this decline. Rather than standing up against corruption, they embraced it. Bribes and favoritism became commonplace, making it impossible for justice to prevail. The influence of wealth and power became so entrenched that those who sought to speak out were silenced or ignored. It was in this atmosphere of corruption and moral decay that Lot, Abraham's nephew, found himself. He tried to live by the principles of kindness and righteousness, but even he struggled to maintain his integrity amidst the pervasive immorality. The inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah believed they were untouchable, blinded by their own arrogance and success. They failed to see how their actions were leading them down a path of no return. The spiritual decline of these cities went hand in hand with their moral collapse. As they lost sight of their values, they also lost their way. What had once been thriving communities became shells of their former selves, consumed by greed, lust, and a disregard for human decency. Yet, even amidst this downfall, there were still a few who held on to hope, believing that change was possible. Amidst the moral decay and corruption of Sodom and Gomorrah, there were still a few individuals who tried to hold on to righteousness. Abraham, known for his unwavering faith, was deeply troubled by the reports of the city's moral state. When he learned that divine judgment was about to fall upon Sodom and Gomorrah, he took an unusual step. Instead of turning his back on these cities, he pleaded with God to spare them. This act of intercession wasn't just about saving Lot, who lived there, but about Abraham's profound sense of justice. He believed that if even a few righteous people remained, they deserved a chance. Abraham's conversation with God is one of the most intriguing dialogues in the Old Testament. Starting with 50 righteous people, Abraham asked if God would spare the cities for their sake. Gradually, he reduced the number to just 10, showing his concern and persistence. Why 10? In biblical culture, 10 was seen as the minimum number required to form a small community or congregation. Abraham was essentially asking if there were at least a small group of righteous people who could influence and change the course of the entire city. His plea demonstrated his hope that even a small remnant of good people could prevent the total destruction. Unfortunately, there weren't even 10 righteous individuals left in Sodom and Gomorrah, indicating just how deep the corruption ran. Lot, on the other hand, found himself in a much more precarious position. He had been living in Sodom for years, and although he was aware of the moral corruption surrounding him, he tried to maintain his integrity. One evening, 2 strangers arrived at the city gate, where Lot sat. He welcomed them and insisted they stay at his home, unaware that these men were actually angels sent by God. Lot only intended to offer them hospitality and protection, not realizing the greater significance of their visit. Later that night, the men of Sodom surrounded Lot's house, demanding that he hand over the strangers so they could abuse them. Lot, horrified by their intentions, pleaded with the mob to spare his guests, offering even his daughters in a desperate attempt to protect the visitors. The people's reaction revealed just how depraved the city had become. They mocked Lot and threatened to treat him even worse than the strangers. At this moment, the angels intervened, pulling Lot back into the house and striking the men outside with blindness. It was then that they revealed their true identity and the reason for their visit: to destroy the city because of its great wickedness. They urged Lot to gather his family and leave immediately. Lot hesitated, torn between the life he had built and the realization that the city was beyond redemption. The angels took Lot, his wife, and his daughters by the hand and led them out of Sodom, instructing them not to look back. As they fled, a tragic event unfolded. Lot's wife, though physically leaving the city, was emotionally still tied to it. Ignoring the angel's warning, she turned and looked back, instantly transforming into a pillar of salt. This transformation has intrigued scholars and archaeologists for centuries. Some researchers suggest that her transformation could be linked to the geographical and environmental conditions around the Dead Sea. The region is known for its high salt content, and sudden movements in the Earth's crust could release pockets of salt and minerals, covering a person instantly. Additionally, Ancient sulfur deposits have been found near the presumed site of Sodom, hinting at a possible chemical reaction that might explain the description of her sudden petrification. These geological phenomena align with the biblical account, offering a fascinating intersection between scripture and science. Abraham's intercession and Lot's eventual escape show two different approaches to dealing with moral corruption. Abraham, though distant, sought to save the cities through dialogue and faith. Lot, being amidst the chaos, faced a more personal struggle. Both men highlight the tension between holding on to hope and confronting harsh realities. Their stories remind us that even in places of great darkness, there is always a flicker of light, however small. But when that light fades, the consequences can be devastating, setting the stage for the final judgment that would seal the fate of Sodom and Gomorrah. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah wasn't a sudden or arbitrary event. It was the culmination of a series of moral choices made by its inhabitants. These cities had long been known for their prosperity, but with wealth came a decline in values. Their willingness to embrace corruption and cruelty turned them into places where the weak were exploited. And hospitality, once considered a sacred duty, was perverted into an opportunity for abuse. This moral degradation was evident in the way strangers, like the angels visiting Lot, were treated. Instead of offering them safety, the people of Sodom sought to harm them, exposing the depths of their depravity. The behavior of the city's inhabitants that night reflected the complete loss of moral integrity. In the biblical narrative, the mob's demand to harm the visitors wasn't just about violence. It symbolized a community that had turned its back on decency and kindness. This act was the final straw, demonstrating that the people were beyond redemption. The angels, after witnessing firsthand the extent of the city's wickedness, declared that destruction was imminent. The moral decisions of these people not only led to their downfall, but also illustrated a broader principle. When a society collectively turns away from justice and goodness, it sets itself on a path toward self-destruction. Interestingly, the way the cities were destroyed has also sparked debates among archaeologists and scientists. Excavations in the region known as el-Hammam, believed by some to be the site of ancient Sodom, have revealed signs of a sudden and intense destruction event. Layers of ash, melted pottery, and high concentrations of sulfur point to a catastrophic event, possibly an aerial explosion or meteorite impact. This aligns with the biblical description of fire and brimstone raining down from the sky. These findings suggest that whatever happened was not just a natural disaster, but a momentous event that left a lasting scar on the landscape. The people's inability to change, even when faced with the presence of divine messengers, shows how deeply ingrained their moral corruption had become. When Lot offered his daughters to the mob in a desperate attempt to protect the guests, it highlighted the city's twisted moral compass. The angels had come to test whether there was still any righteousness left in Sodom, and the response they received sealed the city's fate. Their assessment was clear: the moral rot had reached a point where it could not be reversed. The complete moral collapse of the city made divine intervention inevitable. In the end, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah serves as a powerful reminder of the consequences of unchecked moral decline. The biblical narrative and archaeological evidence together provide a stark picture of how these cities, once thriving and prosperous, became symbols of moral decay and divine judgment. The ruins left behind are a testament to the tragic end of a society that chose corruption over righteousness, and whose fate still serves as a warning for future generations. For centuries, scholars and archaeologists have sought to uncover the true story behind the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Many theories have emerged, but the site of el-Hammam in modern-day Jordan has become one of the most compelling candidates for the location of these ancient cities. Excavations at Tall el-Hammam have revealed a city that was suddenly and violently destroyed. Researchers have discovered layers of ash and evidence of extreme temperatures that melted pottery and left behind traces of sulfur, elements that strikingly match the biblical account of fire and brimstone raining down from the heavens. What's particularly fascinating about Tall el-Hammam is the extent of the destruction. Archaeological findings suggest that the city was exposed to temperatures so high that they caused materials like clay and brick to vitrify, turning them into a glass-like substance. This phenomenon could only be caused by an intense explosion or a sudden surge of heat. Some scientists have proposed that this could have been the result of a meteor or comet exploding in the atmosphere, similar to the Tunguska event in Russia in 1908. The shockwave and subsequent fireball would have been powerful enough to level the city and incinerate everything in its path. These discoveries have sparked considerable debate within the archaeological community. While the evidence aligns with the biblical description, not all scholars agree on the identification of Tall el-Hammam as Sodom. Some argue that the timeline of the city's destruction doesn't perfectly match the biblical chronology. However, the findings still present a compelling case. The presence of melted materials, high concentrations of sulfur, and signs of sudden catastrophe suggest that something extraordinary happened here. This has led some researchers to explore how these events corroborate the truth presented in the Word of God. Moreover, the geographical location of Tall el-Hammam fits well with the description of Sodom's position relative to the Jordan Valley. Ancient texts describe Sodom as being located near the Dead Sea, in a fertile and well-watered area, which matches the environment of Tall el-Hammam before its destruction. The city's strategic location on major trade routes would have made it a wealthy and influential hub, qualities attributed to Sodom and Gomorrah in biblical narratives. This wealth and prosperity could explain why these cities became symbols of corruption and moral decay, drawing the ire of divine judgment as described in the Bible. Whether or not Tall el-Hammam is the actual site of Sodom, the findings there provide valuable insights into the history and culture of ancient cities in the region. They also demonstrate how closely archaeological evidence can sometimes align with the divine truths recorded in the Holy Scriptures. The ongoing research at this site continues to uncover new evidence, offering a glimpse into the final days of a once thriving city. As archaeologists delve deeper, we may one day have additional proof that connects the ruins of Tall el-Hammam to the legendary cities of Sodom and Gomorrah as detailed in God's Word. If you found this exploration insightful and want to continue delving into biblical history and its lessons, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss out on new content that deepens your understanding of God's Word. Share this video with friends and family, and let's spread the knowledge together. See you in the next video, and may God bless you.